Imagine opening a world map where Europe is not the center of gravity. Imagine a global order where Africa is not framed as a developing region, not a recipient of aid, not a footnote to European expansion, but one of the primary engines of global power. This isn't fantasy, it's a timeline that was violently interrupted. So let's ask the question history rarely allows. What if Africa was never colonized? What if the scramble for Africa never happened? What if foreign empires never dismantled African political systems, seized land, rewrote borders, and extracted wealth at industrial scale? This isn't about romanticizing the past. It's about understanding how different the world would look if Africa had been allowed to develop on its own terms. A different global map. Start with the map itself. Before colonization, Africa was not a blank space waiting to be filled. It was already divided into kingdoms, empires, city-states, and federations, each with its own political logic, economic base, and cultural identity. Empires like Mali, Songhai, Ethiopia, Congo, Great Zimbabwe, and Benin were not isolated. They were connected through trade routes stretching across deserts, rivers, and oceans. Now imagine those states uninterrupted. Instead of European borders carved with rulers in conference rooms, African borders evolve organically, shaped by language, trade, geography, and diplomacy. The trans-Saharan trade network doesn't collapse under colonial disruption. It expands, modernizes, and integrates new technologies. African cities become industrial and financial hubs, not because Europe built them, but because existing trade systems scaled naturally over centuries. In this timeline, Africa isn't peripheral to globalization. It's one of its architects. Unleashed African innovation. Colonization didn't just extract resources. It disrupted innovation pathways. African societies had long traditions of metallurgy, architecture, agriculture, medicine, astronomy, and engineering. These weren't static traditions. They were evolving systems of knowledge. Now imagine what happens when those systems are not suppressed, replaced, or dismissed. African metallurgical expertise evolves into industrial manufacturing on African terms, not colonial ones. Agricultural knowledge adapted to diverse climates leads to sustainable food systems optimized for local environments instead of export monoculture. Medical traditions blend empirical observation with experimentation, developing healthcare systems rooted in regional realities instead of imposed European models. Even climate adaptation looks different. Instead of reacting to extraction-driven environmental damage, African societies innovate proactively, designing infrastructure and energy systems suited to their ecosystems. Innovation doesn't stagnate without colonization, it accelerates. Political evolution without disruption. Colonization froze African political development at the worst possible moment. Pre-colonial Africa contained monarchies, councils, federations, religious authorities, merchant republics, and decentralized systems of governance. Without colonization, these systems continue to evolve. Some centralize, some democratize, some fragment and reform. But crucially, they do so internally, through negotiation, conflict, reform, and adaptation, not foreign imposition. There are no arbitrary borders forcing rival ethnic groups into the same state, no administrative systems designed purely for extraction, no political classes trained to serve foreign interests. African governance develops diversity instead of uniformity, and that diversity becomes a strength, a reshaped world economy. Now consider resources: gold, diamonds, copper, rubber, oil, rare earth minerals. In our timeline, these resources were extracted cheaply, exported raw, and processed elsewhere. Value was created outside Africa. In a non-colonized Africa, that doesn't happen. African states control extraction, processing, and trade. They develop internal industries, refine raw materials locally, and capture the full value chain. That single shift rewrites global economics. Europe does not industrialize at the same speed. The wealth gap between continents never explodes to colonial levels. Global trade becomes multipolar much earlier. Africa is not a supplier, it is a negotiator. And without imposed dependency, the so-called resource curse never takes hold. Wealth is reinvested into infrastructure, education, and innovation rather than siphoned off. The global economy becomes balanced, not because everyone is equal, but because no continent is systematically drained. cultural, and intellectual powerhouses. Colonization didn't just exploit Africa, it muted it. Art, philosophy, religion, language, and scholarship were marginalized or erased. Now imagine the opposite. African universities expand and globalize. Centers of learning in places like Timbuktu evolve into international institutions, attracting scholars from across the world. African philosophies shape political theory. African legal systems influence international law. African cosmologies influence science and ethics. Culturally, Africa doesn't get discovered by the world. It defines trends. Fashion, music, cuisine, and language spread globally, not as exotic imports, but as dominant cultural forces. The modern world becomes genuinely multicultural, not superficially diverse, but structurally plural. The geopolitical domino effect. Remove colonization, and global geopolitics collapses into a completely different shape. World wars look different, or may not happen at all in the same form. European empires lack the extracted wealth that funded industrial warfare. The Cold War changes fundamentally. Africa is not a proxy battleground. It is a block of powerful states negotiating from strength. Global alliances form differently. African nations align strategically, economically, and technologically, not ideologically trapped between superpowers. By the 21st century, global power is distributed across continents instead of concentrated in a few former colonial states. Conflict doesn't disappear, but exploitation on a continental scale never becomes normalized. Why this thought experiment matters. This isn't about rewriting history to feel better. It's about recognizing how much of the modern world is built on interruption rather than inevitability. Africa's current challenges are often framed as internal failures. This thought experiment exposes that framing as dishonest. When you remove centuries of disruption, extraction, and imposed dependency, a very different trajectory becomes visible. Africa was not behind, it was stopped. Rethinking power and possibility. So when someone asks why Africa didn't develop like Europe, the better question is, develop into what? Into empires built on extraction? Into economies fueled by colonial violence? Or into something entirely different? A non-colonized Africa wouldn't look like Europe. It would look like Africa, diversified, powerful, innovative, and globally influential in its own way. History didn't just happen, it was forced. And understanding that opens the door to imagining futures not constrained by the lies of inevitability. Because the most dangerous myth in history isn't what happened, it's the idea that it had to.